name's Jono. Kelly and I have the privilege of leading in the life of this church, and most of the time we are just up the passageway, leading in Kids Rock. And I thought before I get started on Nehemiah, I wanted to tell you guys a story, some stuff that's going on at Kids Rock this term, because we are one church. Doesn't matter if you're 1 year old or 100 years old, we're all one church in this, and that's how we operate. So a couple of Sundays ago, I think it was around 6 Sundays ago, we were outside. We didn't have access to the Kids Rock Hall. If you remember, there was a tent outside that side, and we were teaching our lesson there and running through Kids Rock there, and it happened to be the story of Noah. And Noah, Noah's Ark, we all know the story. I'm going through this, and Kelly is standing just off the side, so I couldn't see her, but she's watching the children, and she's just like in prayer and thinking about this thing. She's looking at the faces of these kids, and I mean, I was trying my best. There was enthusiasm, there were oohs, there were ahs, there was all types of fun happening while doing this talk and this teaching. But Kelly's watching the kids' faces and just realized, actually, this is a tall story. Like an old man built a boat, then it rained so much that it covered the entire world. And then the part that she got to was, and the boat was resting on top of a mountain, and the old man was waiting for a dove to come back. It kind of sounds along the lines of like a fiction story. Something that's not real, something that didn't make, that kind of, you read to kids before bedtime, and she stands up with the Bible, and she says, how many of you know that this is real? And like blank faces back to us. She said to them, this is real. The stories you read about, the people you read about, the places you read about, what happened in this book is the truth. It was real. And you could almost genuinely, like standing in that moment, I could see the penny dropping in the lives of these kids. This is real. This thing is real. So after that, Kelly and I had this quick moment together, quick scrum. And okay, scrap everything we have planned for next term. We're going to focus on the real Jesus. You'll notice it's not kidified. It's not made into animation little things, like fun kid version of things, because we want these kids to realize and to know that Jesus is real. He's not a storybook character. And what is in this book is real. And it's true. And then comes the segue into how we're going to get into Nehemiah. We're looking at the very real life of the very real person from the very real book of Nehemiah today. Sound cool? Sounds good. Great. Cool. So let me explain kind of a bit of what we're going to get into today, a bit of a roadmap for us. I'm going to give us the in case you missed it section. We're in week 6 of 12, so about halfway on the dot, and unpack kind of chapters 1 through to 4, and then if you have your Bibles with you, you can open Nehemiah 5. We're going to be through there, going through Nehemiah 5 for this morning. And then we're going to wrap it up in some more worship and prayer and things. So here is the in case you missed it section. How many of you watch series? In case you missed it, last week on Nehemiah. So Nehemiah is a Jewish exile. He grew up in Babylon. He had this incredible job. Cupbearer to the great king Artaxerxes. Doesn't sound like a great job to me. During this time, he receives bad news from his brother. Jerusalem is lying in ruins. It has a desperate need of being rebuilt, not just the walls, but the dignity, the identity, and the people. Nehemiah, who is a Jew, recognizes that he, of all Jews, is in the position to ask the king. To ask the king for help, and against all odds, the king grants him help, resources, finances, and the freedom to go. Nehemiah then travels over 1,300 kilometers to a city he's never visited before, to a people he doesn't know. And he inspects the walls. He inspects them by night. He rallies the people around to get the work going. He skillfully awakens an ordinary people to give themselves to an extraordinary God for a great work through them. The people then rise up. They start rebuilding this wall, most of them in front of their own homes. Some of them got specific tasks, specific assignments that they had to do, and everyone was included, shoulder to shoulder, all hands on deck. And as we heard last week, there was a lot of opposition. There were real enemies. There were threats. There was intimidation. But Nehemiah kept the work going, even to the point where it's weapon in one hand, tool in the other hand. We get to Nehemiah 5, where we're going to be at today, and we see something different. All of a sudden, work stops. They've been facing these enemies. They've been facing these giants. They've been facing opposition. You'd have thought they would have stopped in chapter 4. Come on, let's gather together. The enemy is after us. But no, he stops now in chapter 5. You see something different is coming. There's an internal opposition that has started. I'm not really a movie guy, but I do love a good, cheesy sports movie. Good, cheesy sports movie. Number 3 on all-time greatest movies. I will fight you to the death on this. Number 3 on greatest all-time movies, The Mighty Ducks. The Mighty Ducks. Coach Bombay, Minneapolis, Minnesota. A group of ragtag ice hockey players gathering together, and they are going up against Iceland. USA versus Iceland, all different walks of life. It's the final. They're down. Coach Bombay calls timeout. They gather on the edge of the ice rink all together. He calls timeout. He gets them to down sticks, huddle up around them, and get them to realize that their greatest enemy to them winning is not Iceland. It's themselves. There wasn't trust within the team. Didn't want to pass the puck. Charlie didn't want to pass the puck along. It was the internal disunity that was the real opposition. He had to call time out. And his famous tagline, ducks fly together. That's my family's tagline. Ducks fly together. Ducks fly together. Growing up, they would be like, my dad would say that to us all the time. What do? Ducks fly together. There is unity in that. In a much bigger and much realer way, Nehemiah is facing a similar moment. Get to Nehemiah 5, and we're going to read it in a moment. Up until this moment, they've been focusing on rebuilding the wall. They've been focusing on this project at hand, this big project, not just physical walls, rebuilding a people, restoring an identity, restoring God's people back to their rightful place. Nehemiah was relentless. Don't stop building. Even though there are enemies, he calls time out. He calls the people to come together because something was happening within. Some disunity was happening inside. And church history shows us again and again and again and again and again, surprisingly, how from external persecution, the gospel grows. It doesn't make sense. You'd think it would diminish, but through external persecution, with sword in one hand and tool in the other, the gospel expands. But church history also shows us again and again and again that when there is disunity amongst the church, inside the church, the gospel can be derailed. And one of the biggest areas of disunity that comes to divide and break down the church from the inside out is how the people of God treat and use and handle money. The cat's out the bag. We're talking about money at church today. Let's jump into the Bible. Nehemiah 5, 1-5. Now there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. For there were those who said, with our sons and our daughters we are many. So let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive. There were also those who said, we're mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of the famine. And there were those who said, we have borrowed money for the king's tax on our field and our vineyards. Now our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers, our children are as their children, yet we're forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but it is not in our power to help it, for other men have our fields and our vineyards. This text gives us the background, the context to what's coming next. And where we find ourselves today, yes, there is a lot of opposition from the outside, but there is a bigger thing going on inside. All of a sudden, Jew was against Jew. Brother was calling out brother. Family was against family. You get two types of people in this narrative right now. There are those that have sacrificed their income. There are those families that have put their lives, their farming their land, their financial growth have been put on pause for the sake of rebuilding the wall, for the sake of God's mission. But at the same time, there was so much desperation and need. They had to sell their land. They had to sell their farms. They had to even get to the desperation point of selling their own children into slavery because of the tough economy that was around them. They were in a hectic situation. It was rough, but not because they'd done something wrong, just because of the circumstances that they found themselves in. So they raise up an outcry. They raise up a cry. But who are they raising up the cry against? It's not Nehemiah. It's not the enemies on the outside of the wall. It's their brothers and their sisters inside the wall. You see, because there's another group of people. They're those people that have seen this opportunity to exploit the poor among them. And it really shows such a brokenness within the people of God. See, these people were suffering not because of external stuff that was going on, but because the people of God were not acting like God's family. If a stranger, mistreated one of my children, I would be upset. I would be angry. Of course I would be angry. I'm a dad. But I could get to a point of understanding because we live in a broken world. I can't expect you to love my children the same way that I do. But if somebody I know and I trust, somebody who is part of my family, hurts my children, that would be different. That's betrayal. That hurts so much more. It hurts so much more when it is family. In Nehemiah 5, we see a couple of things. We see that this is a family issue. The men and their wives are raising outcry against their brothers. We see that the rich loved their financial gain more than they loved their own people. And it hurt. It hurt really, really badly. I would call that love for money and financial gain greed. And the unfortunate thing is that what money promises can make you do and make me do really, really hurtful things to people, even the ones closest around me. I need to put a pause here and clarify. I don't think that this book, and I don't think that Jesus would allow me to rightfully stand up here and say money is good or money is bad. It doesn't allow that. It doesn't talk about that way about money. Money is just a thing. Money is a thing. It's what our hearts do with that. That's what it can make it either really dangerous or really powerful. Matthew 6, Jesus is talking about money and he's talking about God. And he's presented money as an alternate, small g, God, that can compete for our affection and our worship rather than our one true God. He says that this God of money can easily hijack our affection and our worship. But then he says something incredible. He says, he doesn't tell us you can't have both. He says you can't worship both. He doesn't say you can't have both. He says you can't worship both. He doesn't say, hey, pick only one. Either love God and then you have no money for the rest of your life, or have money and then God's rejected you. He says you can only worship one. You can only have one God. That's a whole different spin on things. 1 Timothy 6 verse 10. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. It doesn't say that money is the root of all evil. It's the love of money. It's a different tone. It's a different thing in entirety. The thing is, money offers us a couple of things. Money offers us meaning. It offers us significance. It offers us security. John D. Rockefeller, at his prime, he was worth 1% of the American economy, about $300 billion US. He was asked in an interview, how much is enough? How much is enough? And he responded, just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. See, money is a much lesser, small d, God. It's decepting, it's fleeting, it's a substitute, and it offers us meaning, significance, and security. It underdelivers on the eternal scale every single time. It will never satisfy, always wanting a little bit more, always needing a little bit more. And in our context, in Nehemiah 5, we see that this love for money doesn't just hurt our own souls, like the chapter in Timothy says, but actually it hurts the people and the mission of God. Greed hurts other people. Tim Keller, the theologian, he says, Jesus warns people far more often about greed than about sex. Yet almost nobody thinks that they are guilty of it. Being God's family means choosing people over possessions every single time. So we get to the problem, the big problem. Nehemiah 5, 1-5 shows us this. Some people, some Jewish people, are worshiping the god of money. They've put their possessions over people. They are oppressing those that are actually in need, those that are working on the wall. Let's carry on reading. 5 points to follow. The first one, he confronts brokenness head on. Nehemiah 5, verse 7-8. I took counsel with myself, and I brought charges against the nobles and the officials, and I said to them, you are exacting interest each from his brother. And I held a great assembly against them and said to them, we, as far as we are able, have brought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations, but you even sell your brothers so that they can be sold to us. They were silent and could not find a word to say. There's something burning inside Nehemiah. There's an anger burning inside Nehemiah. It doesn't make sense. Our whole mission is to establish a people, take them out of slavery, bring them into their own identity. As soon as they come in, a couple months later, you're enslaving your own people, taking away their identity again. What is going on? How can a love of money do this to you? You can feel the emotion. And I think that there are moments in our lives, and there should be moments in our lives where as Christ followers, we see injustice around us, and our emotion is stirred up. And this feeling of this is wrong, this doesn't make sense, should happen. But if you're anything like me, sometimes our responses in those moments can do more harm than good. Nehemiah responds in an incredible way that we can all learn from. He doesn't just let loose. He doesn't just tune these guys. He is calculated and he is wise. He first rules his own heart before he brings a ruling to others. And he gathers counsel around so he can act in wisdom and in clarity. You see, when we address brokenness head on, we're used by God to uncover what is actually holding them captive. I love how this passage ends. And they were speechless. They could not find another word to say. What a mic drop moment. So where does this lead Nehemiah? Obviously, he points them towards his own glory and his own power. And he says, fear Nehemiah because Nehemiah is the king, or Nehemiah is the governor. No, he doesn't do that. There's no way that he does that. Nehemiah 5 verse 9. So I said, obvious point coming up, The thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God, to prevent the taunts of the nations of our enemies? So I said, the thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God? The people realize, you see in the verse before, they realize they are not living squeaky clean lives. They're not, but why should they? Everyone else is getting away with it. Nehemiah realized that every person in that room, every person there needed a personal revelation of who their lives were accountable to. He doesn't say, turn and walk in the fear of Nehemiah. He says, turn and walk in the fear of God. The fear of God, it's kind of a hard concept to figure out. Am I afraid that God is going to, zap me from the clouds if I do something wrong? No, that's not the fear of God that we're talking about. The fear of God, probably a lot more linked to the way a loving child and a loving father have a relationship. That type of fear, that type of deep reverence and respect. You see, Nehemiah is calling the people to turn and walk and fear God, but actually he's uncovering a deeper thing that's going on. He's asking them, what is your greatest fear? What is your greatest fear? And I'm actually asking that to us this morning too. And I'm not talking about spiders. I'm not talking about geckos or, the dark or something like that. I'm talking about what is your greatest fear? What is the big thing that is lurking? Maybe it's a fear of lack of meaning or lack of significance or lack of security. If you remember those 3 promises that money offers us. The Bible is filled with so many fear not statements. And I think that a love for money and an exposed love for money is definitely not rooted in a fear of God. It's rooted in a fear of something else. It's only in the presence of a greater fear that we can become fearless to the lesser fear. It's only in the presence of the fear of God that we can move from greed to generosity. It's impossible otherwise. My third point, he takes ownership of being part of the solution. Nehemiah 5:10-13. Moreover, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. Let us abandon this exacting of interest. Return to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive orchards, and their houses, and the percentage of money, grain, wine, and oil that you've been exacting from them. Then they said, we will restore these and require nothing from them. We will do as you say. And I called the priests and made them swear to do as they had promised. And I shook out the fold of my garment and said, so may God shake out every man from his house and from his labor who does not keep this promise. So may he be shaken out and emptied. And all the assembly said, Amen. And they praised the Lord, and the people did as they had promised. You see, before telling them what wrongs they needed to do, the next step, what they had to do to make right, Nehemiah highlights his part in redeeming this situation. It's costing Nehemiah. It's not just costing him too. It's costing his family. It's costing his servants. His entire household are sacrificing their potential well-being for the sake of others, for the well-being of others. Nehemiah's ownership levels are super, super high. We've seen this throughout the entire series. He's the guy working on the wall. He's the guy looking around, inspecting everything. He's the guy taking ownership of this move from greed to generosity. See, there's a common theme through the entire book of Nehemiah, from brokenness to redemption, from brokenness to redeemed, from broken to redeemed. He points out what is needed to be made right, but he doesn't do it from the front and say, hey, do what I say. He says, do as I do. He's part of the solution. And the same way with us, generosity, this move from greed to generosity needs to start in our own hearts and start with a love for God and for his people. The fourth point is he uses his position to serve others. Nehemiah 5:14-18. Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor. The former governors who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people and took from them their daily ration, 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants lorded it over the people, but I did not do so, because of the fear of God. I also persevered in the work on this wall, and we acquired no land. And all my servants were gathered there for the work. Moreover, there were at my table 150 men, Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from the nations that were all around. Now, what was prepared at my expense for each day was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep and birds, and every 10 days all kinds of wine in abundance. Yet for all this I did not demand the food allowance of the governor, because this service was too heavy on this people. Nehemiah arrived into Jerusalem, a broken people, the hero that they were waiting for. He had the resources, he had everything, he was the guy. And he could have so easily, through not even changing anything, through just stepping into what the previous governor had set in place, been benefiting financially, been growing, been taking the glory for himself, scooping what he could get from what the previous guys had put in place. But he chose to go without that. He chose to change what the previous guy had set in place and serve the people. Jesus was the most generous person in the world. And his claim to fame, I came to serve and not to be served. And the last point on this, Nehemiah 5:19, he seeks first the approval of God. Remember for my good, O my God, all that I have done for this people. Remember for my good, O my God, all that I have done for this people. Nehemiah models a desire to look for a reward from God. Generosity, when you're looking for a reward from people, is temporary. It's easy. If Nehemiah's heart behind this was to get, the good thumbs up from the king Artaxerxes, maybe he would have been generous for a year or two. If it was to get the thumbs up and the approval of his Jewish brothers, he would have been generous for a couple of years, 5 years, 12 years of constant generosity, of serving others, of putting himself lower than others on there, because he's seeking his reward from God. If our hearts can get that right, if we can seek our reward from God rather than from people, the generosity, the desire for generosity wouldn't run out. It wouldn't run out. I'd love to call the band up as I begin to wrap this up. I want to point us to one more scripture. Nehemiah is an incredible example of generosity. He's a leader. He had this amazing job. He's an incredible leader, but he stepped down from his position of power. He stepped down from his position of authority. He stepped down from his position of glory into humility, providing for others. And I think a working definition for generosity could be giving up something for the sake of somebody else, for the sake of another. Philippians 2, verse 7 and 8. But Jesus emptied himself. By taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. See, the biggest act of generosity I can think of, and I think any of us could think of, isn't giving somebody 5 rand, 5,000 rand, 5 million rand. It all pales to giving up your life for the sake of somebody else. For the sake of somebody else. Jesus is by far the best example of generosity we could ever see and emulate, a radical generosity. You see, he stepped down from his position of ultimate glory, his position of ultimate power, his position of God. Yet, he humbled himself all the way to death. Keyword, generously. The example of Nehemiah's generosity is so much smaller than the incredible generosity that we see from Jesus, giving up everything he had for the sake of you and I. This is the type of generosity that I feel like Nehemiah is pointing the people towards, giving up everything for the sake of the kingdom. I'd love us to stand.